Ultra fit, intellectually superb, and emotionally fully connected. Just three of the many descriptions I could give to our next guest, Rory Cockshaw. Still in his 20s, Rory has committed his life to reducing the suffering in our world in unique and engaging ways. From speaking to thousands of people and appearing on national TV to co-founding a one-of-a-kind game company whose aim is to inspire people to be the best version of themselves in a fun and enjoyable way. Truly an out-of-the-box thinker, writer, athlete, and activist, Rory shares some powerful tips and ideas on how to communicate and inspire others to become the change we wish to see in the world today. I would suggest grabbing a hot cup of tea and truly soaking in the wealth of wisdom and experience coming your way. Mr. Rory Cockshaw, how are you today?
I'm good, thanks. How are you?
I'm very well. I'm so excited to have you on. I was just telling my wife that every time I see you on social media, all I want to do is get up and start running or start training. So I'm going to learn a lot from you today and hope everyone else will as well. And I know there is a lot that you are going to speak about, not just in your training, but also everything that you're doing in life. So we're going to dive straight in. First question I ask all my guests is the two most important days of your life are the day you're born and the day you find out why. In a couple of lines, could you summarize that so we know what you're all about and then we'll go for it?
Sure. Day I was born was 27th of December 2000. I think the day I found out why was 25th of January 2020, I believe, which was the day that I went vegan. And that is now pretty much all that I dedicate my life to.
Brilliant. I love that. Before we get to where you are right now, I want to find out how you got there. So I want to know a little bit about your childhood, growing up, your outlook on life and helping others, and how that went before you got to where you are. So just give me a little bit of your background.
Sure. So I was raised pretty nomadically. I lived in something like 20 houses by the age of 20, moved all around the country. That's England, where I'm from. And largely that was down to my dad's job. So my dad worked as a priest, and I feel like I've imbibed this role of being a priest and kind of preaching to people and helping people achieve certain ends. So my dad, it wasn't just about the religious side of things. It was also simply about helping people and kind of being a therapist or a one-on-one life coach, or just kind of following what he thought was right. And I feel like I've taken on that role, obviously not in a religious sense, and we can talk about that a bit later, but in a vegan sense, effectively. When I was at school, I was very much the nerd, the maths kid, the science kid. And in my teenage years, that's all I wanted to do. And then I think there was a bit of a revolution when I was around 18, 19 years old, completely left academia behind by the age of 21. And now I am a professional vegan, I guess.
Nice. What about your love for animals and nature? When did that come about? Is it something you've always had while growing up? Did you have any companions?
Sure. Yeah, we did have quite a lot of companion animals through the years. Obviously, as a vegan now, it's kind of a taboo subject almost. But we had backyard chickens, so we used to have backyard eggs for a certain number of years, which obviously I no longer agree with the practice of. But we also had various dogs and cats and rabbits and all this kind of stuff. I wouldn't actually say I was a particularly outdoorsy kid. I was never into sports. I was never into exercise or particularly into nature. I did like going on walks, and I'd always go on like dog walks with my parents, while my siblings often sat at home. But actually, to be honest, I was very much an introspective, introverted child who liked doing his homework, liked playing computer games, loved reading books, read every book that I could find. And I was basically like that for most of my life until really my late teens, when I became more interested in sports and exercise on the one hand, and also just the outdoor world and the environment. I remember distinctly when I was about 16, probably, kind of making fun of environmentalists and making fun of vegans and all these groups that I now identify so strongly with. But I was definitely not always the way that I am now, I would say. Nothing like it.
Hmm. Do you have a memory of the first time you witnessed harm towards other animals? And what did that feel like?
I think the first really graphic memory I have of this kind of thing, and it's not exactly what you're asking, I guess, but we used to have rabbits. So each of me and my two siblings had a rabbit kept in a hutch outside my garden when I was probably like 13 or so. And my rabbit one day really went for my sister's rabbit. They like had a horrible fight, and my rabbit like bit into the flank of my sister's rabbit, and it was like awful to look at because there was like blood and bits of like what looked like entrails and things. And I think my sister's rabbit eventually died shortly after. But that was a really horrible, visceral thing. Obviously, I'd seen like David Attenborough documentaries of where a zebra has been chased down by a lion or this kind of thing, but it never really felt real. Like animals don't really suffer. All I'd seen was companion animals having nice lives, and that was it. And then I saw these rabbits go for each other and end up kind of fatally wounding one of the rabbits. That was quite horrible. And I remember also when I was probably in my mid-teens, so like 15 or 16, there was this kind of internet challenge thing where you have to sit down and watch a series of like really gruesome videos, and the challenge is, can you make it to the end? And one of those videos, I don't remember exactly what it was, but one of them was a like slaughterhouse footage, and I was sat there watching it with a friend of mine, George, and we were thinking like, that's a bit horrible. And this was only kind of halfway through the challenge, but already it just made your stomach turn. And this was years before I even thought about maybe even one day going vegetarian, let alone vegan. But yeah, it was kind of eye opening. But it's one of those things that's like a long, slow burn in my head. I'm ashamed now of the fact that it took me so long to go vegan and put two and two together, but immensely pleased that I did.
We can all kind of relate to it sometimes. The first time I heard about what happens to cows on dairy farms was actually on a train, on a tube, coming back home in London. And I met one of my friends, and he was just telling me, look, this is the process. They make the cow pregnant. The cow carries the baby in a womb for 9 months. Baby comes out, baby's taken away from her, and then she cries for that baby for weeks to months while her milk is being taken out, stolen, and sold to the public. And then, if it's a baby boy, he gets killed. If it's a baby girl, she's kept just like her mum, and they're all killed at the age of 6 years when they can live up to 20. So I mean, it felt so out there. I didn't want to believe it because I kind of liked the taste of dairy products at that time. But it took another event where I saw it with my own eyes. Uh, the horrendous treatment. I think it was the visual connection that just changed it, and it was a switch that went off, and I just thought, okay, this cannot carry on at all. So overnight, I did go vegan, but I left dairy overnight, but it wasn't the first time I heard about it that made me do it. So yeah, I do feel a little bit bad about not looking into it then, but I think we're also caught up in our own lives that we don't really think about these things until that point where we think, okay, what's the impact of my lifestyle on the rest of the world? Um, so in terms of your love for animals and nature, I mean, I know for all of us, if we witnessed it out there in front of us, if it's a baby pig or a baby dog being beaten up, we would scream and shout as kids to try and stop it. And yet, we at home, all of us, were taught or given all these animal products, meat, dairy, eggs, fishes, etc. Do you feel that there's more awareness now amongst the public, especially amongst kids? I mean, how do you feel times have changed? Because I feel now there's more information out there than there's ever been. You look at some of the ads playing on TV, and it's all out there. And I wish it was like that when we were growing up. But how do you feel it's kind of going? Do you feel that there should be more awareness, more exposure? What do you feel?
I think there should always be more exposure and more awareness. I think that's the kind of the point of my existence. Coming back to that why question, but I do think things are so much better than they used to be. Loads more people are just asking the question of, you know, where does this thing come from? Because back in 10 years ago or so, if you go into a supermarket, there was basically just meat, dairy, fruit and veg, and obviously the whole grains and things, but there weren't really the meat replacements. There wasn't anything obviously marketed as vegan or signposted this thing is vegan, and actually lots of people probably couldn't even tell you what the word vegan meant. Nowadays I do get some people who ask, what actually is a vegan, like can you eat fish or can you have this, that or the other. So vegans don't have dairy at all then. In fact, just literally when I was walking into my house today back from work to film this podcast, my next door neighbour stopped me, and he's from Goa in India, and he asked, "Oh, I've got these sweets that have ghee in them, which obviously is based on milk fat. Do you want them?" And I was like, "Sorry, mate, I really appreciate it, but as a vegan, I can't have ghee." And he said, "Oh, but they're from Indian cows, they're very high welfare and all this." And I was like, I respect that, of course. But as a vegan, these are my views. And, I was kind of teaching him what vegan was from the ground up. And there are some people like that, because obviously it's very culturally based as well. But for the most part, the awareness of veganism is infinitely better to what it was. But it's almost depressing that there's still so far to go. At the same time, it's invigorating that we've got such a challenge ahead of us that we have to keep on working. We have to keep on producing content and having conversations and talking to our friends and our family and making videos and all of the stuff that we do and standing out on the street. I feel like there is a big mountain to climb, but if we stop and look back at how far up the slope we've come, it is pretty inspiring.
Mm. When you speak to people, what are some of the reactions or responses you receive, and how do you respond to them? I know you get negative responses, you get positive responses. How's it generally been? Because I know you've been really active on this front. So tell me a little bit more about that.
Yeah. So I've had probably, I don't know, thousands of conversations with non-vegans over my time. Both just talking to friends and family. It's a small part of that. But as my job, so I'm a full-time campaigner for a leading vegan charity. So I literally go to all of these events and have so many conversations time and time again for an entire day, many days in a row. It is intense, but I've been around the block in terms of having the vegan conversation. And I've found that the responses you get are largely a function of the way in which you present veganism. Because even though we have come a long way in educating the public already, most people don't have like a firm set opinion of veganism. And their opinion of veganism pretty much boils down to their opinion of you and what you've just said and what you're showing them and the leaflet you've just handed them. If you hand them a leaflet that basically says, you're a bad person, stop killing animals, like obviously as a straw man, if you hand them that leaflet, they're going to be like, no, I don't want that, thank you very much, not interested. Here's a bunch of my kind of post hoc reasoning as to why it's okay for me to kill animals. Whereas if you hand them a free food sample and say, hey, try this, it's completely plant-based, healthy, good for the environment, good for animals, they'll be like, oh yeah, sure, I'll try that free food. They'll have the free food, they'll like it, and then you can bridge conversation with them. And I've got a few conversational strategies as well. One main one that I always come back to in pretty much every conversation, which I can tell you in a sec. But when you have a conversation on that basis, people are then so much more positive. They're far more receptive because they've just had food that they like and they know that they like it. And so that then is their opinion of both you and of vegan food. And their post hoc rationalizations are then far more positive with respect to veganism.
Great. What kind of food do you give out?
Depends on the event. So if we're talking about like pig farming, then it's sausage rolls. If we're talking about dairy, then it's hot chocolate or it's yogurt samples or it's cheese and crackers. Like Cathedral City cheese on Ritz crackers is a killer combo, or Applewood smoky cheese, of course. Cookies, we've given out lots of cookies in our time, and donuts, and basically, and it depends on the sort of thing you're talking about and what vegan food product replaces that thing. We almost always have vegan food product, or like fake chicken, for example, like VFC chicken. That's a real good one. But it depends on the point we're trying to get across, in essence.
I love that. I almost thought about something, going down my neighborhood and just giving out free stuff and just asking people what they think about this and how we can get through this together. Because obviously it goes way beyond animals now. We know it's literally affecting our own survival. So even if they hate animals, this is something that everyone needs to know about. Otherwise, we won't have a world to live in. Let's go back to that strategy. Is that the strategy that you, or the strategies that you use in communicating effectively?
Yeah, so the strategy is, so step one, give somebody free food. Everybody likes free food, and it tastes a million times better because it's free. And so give them the free food. Start off with also like some small talk. Obviously, I go to lots of university events, so I'll ask them, oh, what are you studying? Where are you from? Yada, yada, yada. Nothing about veganism whatsoever, because people like talking often about themselves. I'm talking about myself on this podcast right now, and it's quite enjoyable. People like talking about themselves, and they also trust you more when they've given away a little bit of themselves already. You get under the bonnet of the car, so to speak, and you know something about them, and try and find some common ground with them. And then once you've chatted for like 2-3 minutes, that's when you then go into the veganism thing, and you say, oh, so obviously we're here for talking about veganism. Do you have a positive, negative, or neutral view of veganism? What do you think about vegans? And I always go with that positive, neutral, and negative kind of structure, because most people will say, oh, actually, pretty positive. And because you've just made them feel good, right? And you'll say, oh, why is it a good thing? And then they're on the kind of they're almost on your side already, because they've said, oh yeah, veganism is a good thing. You ask them why, and then they literally list off the reasons that veganism is good. And often these people don't know like loads and loads, so they always start with, oh, it's good for the environment, and I'm like, yes, it's great for the environment. And then I say, anything else? And then they're like, oh, I guess it's good for animals as well, because that's like the main thing that most people don't want to think about. Or they'll say, oh, it's really healthy, because there's a weird dichotomy where half of the population view veganism as really healthy and the other half view it as really unhealthy. You're never quite sure what you're going to get. But anyway, so they go through and they list off all these good things about veganism, and you're like, brilliant. So we're on the same side almost. So what's stopping you? Have you ever thought about veganism? What's your hesitancy about the whole thing? And then they'll say, oh, it's, I'm just not sure where I can get my protein from, or I'm too lazy, or it's too expensive. And it always boils down to lifestyle factors. Like, it's never that they don't agree with that we should protect the environment. It's never that they're like, oh, I just think killing animals is great, because actually most people don't think that when they actually look at their own ethics. So when you approach it from this angle, it's then just solving, well, actually the average vegan saves about a third on their food bill every month, so the expense is not an issue. Here's a bunch of protein sources. Here's loads of recipes. Here's an easy app you can download called Vegan Recipe Club, where you can literally have like access to about 1,000 different vegan recipes. And you go through a process of problem solving with them. And it's always practical problem solving. You actually don't even need to breach into the environment or the ethics. And then that person leaves the conversation. They probably forget about 90% of what you've said to them, because most people do after any given conversation. I'll be lying in bed this evening having basically no idea what I've said to you, because every conversation just filters out to their minds almost immediately. But they will remember the way that they felt. I will remember enjoying this podcast, for example, and hopefully you will too. They will remember that vegan guy that made them feel good, that asked them about themselves, that gave them loads of resources, that made them feel empowered to take on this vegan lifestyle. And they'll actually feel pretty good about the whole vegan thing. And maybe next time they're in the supermarket, they'll remember, oh yeah, that guy recommended this, or let me just go down the plant-based aisle and see what they've got. It's all about that little communication shift, rather than and what I used to do was a very kind of aggressive method of vegan advocacy. Now I think a more effective one is walking with them in this kind of Socratic dialogue. That's my method.
Love that. Thank you for sharing that. I think all of us have a lot to learn from that because it's always difficult to approach this. Well, not difficult. It's a little bit of a challenge, but then you find your way, you find your niche, and then you can talk about it effectively. It's always good to find that common ground, and then dialogue can happen effectively. But sorry, you were saying.
Exactly. And I don't want to project the idea that I'm somehow a perfect vegan advocate either. And I think there's a lot of use in the idea of having an ecosystem of different approaches, of different methods, of different philosophies. I don't think homogeneity is a good thing for the vegan movement. So I don't say everybody should use my particular method. I actually feel like having lots of different methods on the go is a good thing. But yeah, that's just my view. And obviously, I very often fail at my own method of vegan advocacy. Very often, I do get annoyed because I am a fallible human being. Very often, I will leave an angry, sarcastic Facebook comment that the next day I'll be like, "Did that really help that situation?" But none of us are perfect. None of us are perfect advocates. What we can do though is try and use trial and error and make errors and learn from them.
Definitely. Are there some specific facts that you share that surprises people the most?
Yes. So I think the thing that really kind of gets people's goat, to pardon a non-vegan expression, is the implications of non-veganism for actual human health. And I don't mean health as in like obesity or diabetes, but as in like future pandemics. So obviously everybody lived through COVID and it sucked and nobody had a good time and millions died. And we fundamentally, nobody wants another COVID-19 pandemic. No matter who you ask, nobody wants that again. And when you tell people the risk imposed by animal agriculture in terms of causing future pandemics, and not just future pandemics, but antibiotic resistance as well, and you tell people this isn't actually something that's just hypothetical, but actually in the next like 25 years, there's pretty much a 50% chance that we will have, I think it was like 47 to 57% chance that we will have another COVID-like pandemic, which is just crazy. You also tell them, 2/3 of our antibiotics are used in animal farming. That means that we are breeding antibiotic resistant infections, and actually found antibiotic resistant infections in like the River Wye in South Wales like a few months ago. We're also seeing like avian flu. There's millions of birds that have been killed already and locked away since like November the 8th or November the 7th, I think, last year. So they've spent about the last 5 months inside because of this disease that has more than 50% kill rate in humans. And actually scientists are super concerned about this. Politicians and the media are hardly mentioning it at all. When you talk about the fact that we are more likely, my generation are more likely to die from antibiotic resistant infections, which are most likely to come from animal agriculture, than we are from dying of like cancer, people are like, oh wow, this is something that is really going to affect me. And because people are fundamentally selfish, this actually gets them thinking almost a lot more than talking about, pigs being suffocated in gas chambers or chicks being macerated or all these kind of horrible things. I think the direct implication for human disease, human health, pandemics in human society, I think that's the most kind of shocking and terrifying fact for most people I talk to.
Mm. Do you know, before COVID even came about, I remember being in India and there was a huge exhibition on the environment there. And the fact that scared most people then, when I was speaking about it, was the fact that most of our rainforests will be gone by 2048 and the oceans will be deemed dead by 2050. And this is within 25 years, 30 years from now. This is in our lifetime. There were all these young people there and they were calculating, okay, in 30 years, I'll be this. And then I'm like, yeah, this is going to happen in our lifetime. And then if we understand what the rainforests and oceans are, they are our true lungs. If we think about it, these what we have in our chest cavities are just facilitators. It's the oceans and the rainforests that actually produce the oxygen and take our carbon dioxide away. And yet, this is something that's not even, unfortunately, taught in schools. And the other fact that really, made people wake up, and this is a little bit more recent, was Silesh Rao's Climate Healers video about extinction. He extrapolated how fast extinctions are happening, and he found out that by the year 2026, most wild animals that we know of will be completely extinct or near to extinction. And that is unbelievably shocking. These are animals, lions, cheetahs, elephants, whatever. These are animals that most of us have grown up with and want to see at least once in our life. And it's just so heartbreaking to know that within a decade, they'll only exist in books and YouTube and zoos and protected little pockets of forest or whatever. And the situation is so urgent. And what I struggle with sometimes is, how do you wake people up to the solutions that we already have? But how do you wake people up and make them motivated? And I think your point about, telling them about future pandemics, imminent pandemics, I think it's a very strong point. But is there anything else that you've seen in your conversations that have made people think, okay, actually, you know what? We need to do something about this today?
It's so hard because there's such a strong human kind of fight or flight instinct when you have these conversations. Most people, if caught unawares, and if they are just in a particular mood that day, they've gotten up out the wrong side of bed, as most people do most days, they will have an immediate flight response. And I know so many people who I've either had these conversations with, or I've picked up on little cues of things that they've said, where they basically say, we're basically stuffed anyway, right? Nothing we do is going to make a difference. And so, and you have this conversation, and then the next week you see an Instagram story of them tagged at like a local steakhouse or something like this. And it's like, that's a problem. You know what happens. You know the environmental impacts of beef. You know deforestation. You know all of this stuff. But because your head is just so firmly lodged in the sand, they just keep on doing what they've always done. People are so disempowered. And I mean, there's so many people on the planet now that each one of us is only like one in 8 billion, right? And so if 1/8 billionth of the population makes a particular change, goes vegan or does whatever, starts recycling more, it doesn't actually make a difference in the grand scheme. And so most of us are like, oh, so there's no point doing that anyway then. My approach is thinking, well, if I do one day have grandchildren, which I probably won't because I don't want to bring life into the world as it currently is. But if I have, say, adopted grandchildren, then I want to be able to look them in the eye and tell them, you know what, I did what I could when I knew how to do it. When I got that data, I did something with it and I acted in a certain way that maybe it made me unpopular and maybe it didn't actually do anything in the long run. And maybe I was just 1 in 8 billion and whatever I did, it would have been futile anyway, but I did it no matter what. That's the conversation I want to be able to have, say in 40, 50, 60 years' time, if I'm still alive, and if those hypothetical adopted grandchildren exist. And I feel like most people just don't have that kind of principle. All they want to do is settle down, have a normal life, keep on living their current habits, find a partner, have kids, go on holidays. They want to do all the things that have been kind of glamorized to do, right? They want to do all of the normal influencery type things or the normal nuclear family type things. And for me, there's just so much the environment, the ethical crisis of animal agriculture, these future pandemics, they're so much more important than that I personally no longer can understand the mindset of somebody who does dig their head into the sand. And yet I know that not all that long ago, I was also one of those people who made fun of vegans, who made fun of environmentalists, who didn't understand where people like me nowadays was coming from. When I was 16, I didn't care a jot, to be honest. I just thought, well, we're stuffed, so let's carry on. But nowadays, thankfully, I've made a change, and hopefully I've inspired at least a few others to make similar changes.
I'm sure you have. Well, you know what? Surprisingly, that's the thing that drives me as well. And whoever in the future who looks up to me, and if they ask me, they're going to put us on trial. The next generation, if the world allows it for our species to still be alive in 30, 40 years time, they're going to put us on trial. And if we can put our hands on our hearts and say, look, you know what, we did everything we could for you, we did everything we could to actually have a planet to live in, I'm happy with that. Even on my last day, if I can look back and say, you know what, I used my time effectively, regardless of the outcome. I did everything I could. I did my duty as a human being, as the best human being I could be. I'm happy with that. So I'm so glad that you share that sentiment, and I think it's so important to not be attached to the outcome. This is a common teaching in Hinduism. It's part of the Gita. You do your duty, and then leave the rest, leave the outcome to the universe, and that's all we can, man. I feel that when we do that, we're even more effective because you're not attached to any sort of negative response to what we're trying to do. Um, yeah. Um, Yeah, I mean, just like you, I find it very, very saddening. I find it a little bit, it almost makes me think, it shocks me that there's still so many people who either choose to be blind or don't just consciously, don't want to see anything. And they carry on with the same behavior, the same mentality of having that normal, family unit and going on holidays and this and that. And I feel that even if there's not much, the crux of all of this is there isn't much that needs to change amongst them. They can still go on their holidays or whatever, but as long as we just change what we eat, change who we're using in our daily lives, and it's not even that many things, it's just anything that comes from another being: meat, dairy, eggs, and fishes, the skin that they have, that we choose to wear, and we have replacements for that as well. So it's not like you're even telling people that, you know what, you have to go live like a hermit. We don't even have to do that. All we need to do is reduce our individual carbon, energy, resource, and waste footprint. And the easiest way to do that is to shift to a vegan lifestyle. You have all the food in the world that you want. You can enjoy it. You can still go on your holidays if you want, and just have, more or less normal lifestyle and still have a planet to live on. And I wish people knew that, because sometimes I feel that, oh, it's all or nothing. They have this kind of mindset, oh, I have to go to the other end and just not be a normal person anymore. But as you've shown, as I've shown, we can have perfectly normal lives and still be part of that positive change that we want to bring into the world.
Yeah, quite exactly.
So, with regards to your thoughts on having kids, how's that going? And I love the fact that you said that you'd rather adopt someone who's already here than bring someone into a world that is.
Yeah. I so actually coming back to what you kind of just said is actually it is so easy to be vegan nowadays. I almost feel like I should. I'm now comfortable with veganism. I'm always going to be a vegan, no matter what happens. I will always be an ethical vegan. It just is the only logical position to me, right? So recently, I've started flirting with kind of other ideas, other topics, other things to interest me and to learn about, because I feel like I've reached. It's not quite a dead end with veganism because you're always learning, but it's almost like ways to expand that veganism into other topics. So, for example, the idea of having children, that fundamentally is an ethical issue, right? Whether or not to bring life into the world and under what circumstances to do so, and how much life to bring into the world, and issues of things like overpopulation. What does that actually mean? And can we even talk about overpopulation because of things like developing countries and all these different issues? Actually, overpopulation is a real thing that's interested me a lot recently, and also more so my personal ethical views on should I have children ever. And one thought that struck me is there are basically no circumstances in the world as it is. There are no circumstances under which having biological children is ethically superior to or ethically advisable compared to adopting children. Right? Adopting children that already exist is better ethically, environmentally on every front. Right? Because when you have a biological child, there is an opportunity cost there. You could have either, with the same amount of resources, had a biological child or adopted a child. And by the way, this isn't judging anybody that has biological children at all. Obviously, I am the biological child of somebody, as are all of us. And so it's not that. It's simply a case of, on a one-on-one basis, if I have a choice to essentially rescue a life that already exists, that doesn't necessarily have anybody to love them, to care for them, to provide for them, that is already potentially suffering, and I have the capacity to ameliorate that suffering by giving that individual a life, a home, food, shelter, family, love, affection, education, all of these things, why would I choose to create another life when I could protect that one that already exists? And that is the essence of, I think, the vegan ethic. And this isn't saying vegans should never have children, because I think it's more complex than that when you look on a population level. But this is saying, I think that the philosophy of veganism, the idea that wherever possible we ought to minimize suffering as far as possible and practicable, I do think that actually applies in some strange sense to, say, adopting children. And that's why I have a really strong kind of instinct to one day be a father. Like, I hope I will be. But I think that my biological imperative to kind of to reproduce personally is weaker than the ethical imperative to adopt rather than copulate, essentially. It's like in companion animals, adopt, don't shop. Similar thing in kids, although it's not quite shopping. I think shopping for children is also ethically unadvisable.
Yeah, thank you. And it's so nice to be able to have a conversation about this, because you're right, not many people speak about it. And yet it's one of the most impactful things that someone could do.
Yeah. If you look on basically any graph of of effective environmental actions, pretty much all of the graphs have plant-based in the kind of the most effective bit. They've got plant-based diets. They've got living without cars or swapping your car to an electric car. They've got avoiding flying where possible, and they've got not having children. And so many people are not yet ready for the conversation about children because it's such a very personal thing. And also you get accused of saying, well, obviously the populations that are reproducing most in the world are those in kind of developing countries. Are you really going to tell them not to reproduce? Because that seems very colonial, and indeed it does. And so that's very much a tightrope that needs to be walked very finely. And for me, it's not about antinatalism. It's not about saying we should not reproduce. It's more about challenging pronatalism, which is the idea that we have to or we should reproduce. And it's about empowering people through things like women's education and access to healthcare and access to contraception. It's about these things and giving people the choice and telling them, there are all of these different options you can take, either not having kids or adopting kids or having your own kids. And we need a healthy balance of all of them. Even having one fewer child than you plan to is an impactful choice. So it's not antinatalism. It's just a kind of anti-pronatalism, if that makes sense.
100%. And I think anyone who thinks that we need to be telling the poorest 1.2 billion people that they need to stop having kids, I think we need to look at ourselves first. And we in the West come in that top 1.2 billion in the wealth spectrum. And again, Silas Rao's book, I can't recommend it highly enough. The book that he wrote is called Carbon Dharma. And one of the things that we do discuss is the population conundrum. And it's found that the people in the top 1.2 billion of this spectrum use up 64 times as many resources as those in the 1.2 billion poorest people on the planet. Right? So for those in the 1.2 billion on the lower end would look at the top 1.2 billion and look at us like we're 83 billion. Actually, in actual fact, if you think about how much resources that they use compared to how much we use. So, it's not even about population. It goes far beyond that. It's about how much is each individual using up. And the reason why, which you already know, that the reason why we in the West or any developed nation has such a high footprint when it comes to resource use is mostly to do with who we're eating, because the amount of resources that go into raising animals just to use them, exploit them, and kill them. And again, this is something that we can change, and we don't need to have a fight about this and compare, oh, you're using this much. If we can all find that common ground of shifting to a plant-based world, we can live together and have that conversation and not feel like we're pointing fingers at each other, because this is again exactly how countries like India and countries in Africa react when the population question comes up. But we all have to remember it's not just about population. It's about how would 10 billion people live, because that's the number we're heading towards in 2050. How would we live in a way that we can actually live on a sustainable planet? And it all comes down to what we're using and who we're using and eating up.
Yeah, there's a useful equation when thinking about overpopulation, which is overpopulation equals population times consumption, right? Because people think overpopulation is just when the population gets too high. In actual fact, the most overpopulated country in the world, according to that equation, is the United States. It's not India, it's not countries in Africa, it's not anywhere like that, it's not China. Because the population's consumption in the United States is so high, and they also have quite a large population, but it's relatively sparsely populated in most areas, they're actually the most overpopulated country on the planet. So it's not that we're pointing the finger at like India or a country in Africa or China or whatever and saying you're overpopulated. Actually, we're pointing the finger at the United States and also per capita places in Western Europe, the UK, England. It's these places which actually are the most overpopulated kind of per unit landmass, because our consumption is just so high. And as you say, largely the fact we are eating meat, dairy, we're eating sentient beings that themselves require so many resources to live in the first place, when we could just be eating plants, which we aren't.
Hmm. Do you know, when I have these kind of conversations with some of the people that I meet, a lot of them blame development. A lot of them blame, new houses coming up, and all this new builds coming up. And obviously that is a factor, because land, forests, soil, all of that has to be cleared off. And you're talking about trillions of lives just lost in this increase of urbanization. But again, if you look at the statistics, if you look at the ice-free land on the planet, 1% is what's dedicated to urbanization. And you have 45% of all the ice-free land on the planet dedicated to grazing and raising feed for livestock. So it's 45 times more land being used in what we eat compared to, having all these new builds and making more houses and stuff. So again, I think it's important for people to remember that it doesn't just come down to urbanization and development and all of that. So it always stems back to what we're eating. And this is the shocking bit, because when I learned about this, I thought, okay, ice-free land, right? That includes deserts, and that includes all the unlivable land out there. And if out of that we've taken up 45% just for raising livestock and animals just to eat them, that means there's even less, far less forests and arable land left. It's not just about, okay, 55% left. It's far less, because we haven't even counted the deserts and the ice, not the Iceland, but the deserts and all the unlivable areas. So, we have to find a way where we can coexist with all the other beings in the world. And this is the thing. And Animal Rebellion talk about it a lot, whereby they say that we have to mend a broken relationship with animals and nature. And right now we have one species, our species, causing the extinction of 10,000 species every year. Again, something that most of us can't even imagine or just even have our minds digest, but this is where we are. And I think for any kind of arguments or any kind of discussions we have, I think it's nice to be able to convey the facts compared to what people mostly think about is the cause of where we are. Let's talk about your training, because this is the other juicy bit. How's that going? And just tell me a little bit about your journey of how you are doing what you're doing and how you've developed over the years.
Sure. So I am essentially a rower turned ultra runner, I guess. So I started rowing in my first year at university. I went to a rowing uni, and I had never really done exercise before. Particularly, I did PE at school, And I carried on kind of playing sports a bit recreationally in sixth form, but really didn't have any cardio fitness. I was kind of like a big lump of muscle, essentially, because I was always big kind of naturally. I picked up weightlifting a bit because my brother was really into bodybuilding, and I figured, weightlifting is fitness. But I couldn't run more than a few hundred meters without just getting, working up a sweat and hyperventilating and all this. I had basically zero fitness. I was just big and strong. So went to university, and I figured. So I went to Cambridge, which is obviously huge for rowing. And I figured, when in Rome, do as the Romans do. And so I rowed. So over the course of 3 years, I worked up to becoming kind of a student rowing coach, I guess. So I trained the next generation of rowers below me. I then became the boat club captain as well in my third year of my particular college's boat club, which was fantastic. And a lot of my best friends now are from my rowing days. But I went to university through the pandemic. And as we all know, that sucked. And so I spent a good year of my 3 years at university basically locked away at home. And I could go outside for 1 hour a day each day and exercise with one other person, socially distanced. And so that's when I picked up running, because I figured, well, I've started getting some cardiovascular fitness from my rowing adventures. Surely running is basically the same. Turned out I hated running, but I had started dating a girl who lived on the other side of town from me. And so what we'd do is I'd run about 4 kilometres to her house. We'd go on a run together for about, I don't know, half an hour or so. And then I'd run home again. So I was exercising with one other person for up to an hour each day, socially distanced, fitting within the rules. So I was and we did that 2 or 3 times a week. So I was eventually running something like 10 miles a day, 2 or 3 times a week. From having never really run before. So eventually I worked up to like a half marathon in, I think, the July of 2020 or 2021. That was my first ever half marathon. It was terrible. In the last like 5K, I had to stop and walk for bits. I had to sit on a wall and catch my breath. I was nowhere near fit enough to be running a half marathon. It was something like 2.5 hours, 2 hours and 40 minutes, maybe up to like 3 hours if you include the bits for which I stopped, which wasn't the fastest half marathon the world has ever seen. Didn't break any records. But then I think 6 months later, I worked up the bravery to try another one, did another half, did better, kind of got the bug for doing better and better, entered a marathon. And then now I run ultra marathons. And it's all because the first time I ever tried each distance, the first marathon I ever did was horrendous, but I wanted to do better. And then the first ultra marathon I did was horrendous, but I wanted to do better. And it was always this bug inside me in the back of my head saying, I reckon I can do that again, but better. And that's what really fuels me now. Now I'm basically full-time just running, training for a few ultra marathons, training for a 24-hour race in August, and a few others this year. But yeah, that's my fitness journey in a nutshell.
I have no words for that. So ultra marathon, is that like a double marathon? Is that what it is?
It's not necessarily double, although a double marathon would be an ultra marathon. An ultra marathon, quite simply, is anything longer than a marathon. So my first ultra marathon was 55 kilometers. A marathon, of course, is about 42 kilometers. You get a lot of different sorts of ultras, and I find them fascinating because there's no better way to discover who you are and what really motivates you than going out and running for like 8 hours through the countryside and experiencing pain like you've never felt it before. It's a really powerful way of kind of getting to know yourself and knowing that when you're in the worst physical pain you've ever felt, you will still show up for yourself and you will still put one foot in front of the other. And you still have the dedication somewhere there in your brain to break through the fact that your kneecaps feel like they've fallen off and your feet are blistered to high heaven and your legs just don't want to take another step. It's really powerful knowing that you still can. And that's why I'm kind of so obsessed with the sport nowadays.
I feel like I'm talking to another David Goggins and Rich Roll rolled into one.
Yeah.
So have those guys inspired you as well?
They certainly have, and I'm honoured that you think I'm anything near those guys. I Yeah, like David Goggins is an interesting one because on the face of it, like you could look at him and think, oh, he's a bit of a meme. He finishes all his videos with "stay hard" and all this kind of stuff. But actually, if you think about what he's saying, a lot of it has a lot of sense behind it. And he always talks about how he doesn't do this because he enjoys running. He does this because he is treating it like a big experiment. Like he wants to know how far can you push yourself. And he's got this 40% rule. You've probably heard of it, where when you think you have nothing left in the tank, you have 40% more. It's not 10% more. It's not 20% more. It's not 30% more. It's 40% more. And I think he's right because, like the first marathon I ever did, it was about 60% of the way through, maybe 70%. My legs had pretty much given up. And the last 10K were such a slog. I was just dead inside and outside. I was sitting on tree stumps. I was limping through. I was barely making it. It was laps. So it was like 8 times 5K laps. And it was hot and I was running out of water and I hadn't eaten enough and I was going a bit delirious and I was chanting rowing calls to myself and I still made it round. And it wasn't what I would today call necessarily a good time, but it was my first one. And now I want to push myself and see how much better can I do. But I'm not necessarily interested in going fast. I'm interested in going far. And so I want to find out how far I can actually go, how long I can keep like high heart rate, running through whatever scenery there is. I want to know just how far can I actually go and how far deep into the pain cave can I go and still pull myself out at the end of it. So I'm by no means a good ultramarathoner. I don't come anywhere near a podium in anything I do. But I do have a 20-year advantage on everybody else in the sport. Ultramarathoning is a very old sport. Most people who are doing it are like in their 40s or their 50s. I'm 22 years old. Most of these people only started in their 30s, 40s, 50s. So I've got decades on them. So by the time I'm their age, I'll leave them in the dust.
Nice. I love that. It made me think of the other thing that David Goggins says is that he does it not because he likes it, but he's building calluses in his mind, whereby you're finding out what you're capable of, but also the amount of pain that you can take. Because he keeps talking about this phone call, that phone call one day that's going to come, that's going to shake and completely destroy your world of losing someone that you love, and if you're able to always get through the painful situations and by practicing that as a discipline, you can get through anything that life throws at you because that time is coming for all of us. It's not an if, it's a when, and we all cope with it differently. But I think this is one of the most effective ways of coping through what's coming, because you're training yourself, and it's not just a physical train. You are mentally training your mind because everything's coming from that. Even when your body's broken, it's your mind that powers it, and you just fight through that. And it also reminded me of a small account that Rich Roll talked about in his book, Finding Ultra. He talked about it in Finding Ultra, and he said that there was a time when he was running, and he completely lost himself to the point where it's almost like that out of body experience where he felt like he was just flying. And when he came to, so to say, when he became conscious of where he was miles away from where he should have been. But I just loved how that spiritual aspect was brought into the discipline of running, and I feel it's almost meditative. I don't know, is that how you feel sometimes when you're doing it?
Yeah, for sure. A lot of the time, it is very meditative. It's just putting one foot in front of the other, and that's why I love this sport so much. Is because it's so simple. Like anybody, almost anybody, can go outside and run, no matter how far, whether it's to the next lamppost or it's to the next town. Like anybody can run some of the way, or they can walk, or they can wheel, or they can do whatever. But it's the simplest and it's the most accessible. It's the most accessible sport you could imagine, but it's not always plain sailing. When I was doing my most recent ultramarathon, which was 71 kilometers through the Brecon Beacons, that in the last 5K, the wheels really fell off. Like I was not in a good way. I was biting back tears because it hurt just so much, and I had to go back to basics. And it was the opposite of a meditation. It wasn't clearing my mind and you know being mindful or anything. It was trying to think, why the hell am I doing this? Like, what godly reason am I actually here for? And I realized that actually there's actually a lot of people, and this isn't me bigging myself up, but there's a good number of friends, of family, of acquaintances who have said to me, hey, I went out on a run today because I saw you doing this, or I saw you doing that, or I've gotten into healthier eating, or I've done my first 5K. For example, my mum. My mum never really did much exercise when we were growing up because she was full-time mum and then went into being a nurse and didn't really exercise very much. She would go on walks and she'd swim a little bit, but she started running last October and hated it. Didn't like her runs. Every morning, well, not every morning, about 3, 4 mornings a week, she would message me and say, I'm going on a run. I'm messaging you so that I go on this run, because otherwise you will ask me and I'll have to say, oh, I've not been on a run yet. And it's accountability for her. And now she loves running. She actually finds it more difficult to have a day where she doesn't run than where she does. Right. The other day she took off like 2 minutes from her personal best at park run, from like nearly 35 down to 32:30, and that's just incredible. That's a massive jump. The week before she did her first 10K race, and she said to me in the beginning of when she started running that I'd inspired her to go and do this. My dad as well started going to the gym for the first time in decades because he'd seen the things I was doing and said, hey, I want to be able to do that sort of stuff with my son. I've got friends who, I've got a few friends actually who recently picked up running because I do so much running stuff. They were like, oh yeah, I should really be doing that as well. It's not a direct call to action. I don't go out there and say, you should go and run. I say, hey, look how good this is. Look how fun this can be. Look how healthy you can be. Look how powerful you can be on a plant-based diet, living a healthy lifestyle, getting enough sleep, going for runs, enjoying nature. Because most people actually have plenty of time to go and run. They can go and run, but we're so obsessed with scrolling through TikTok or Instagram Reels or just faffing about the house and not going and doing things that make us better. And that's what it's not about running. It's not about the fitness. It's about actually making ourselves better. And that's what I was thinking in that last like 5K of that 70K race. I was in pieces. I was not well in the slightest. I was feeling every kind of injury under the sun. And I was biting back tears thinking, why the hell am I doing this? Well, it's because my mum has gotten into fitness because of this. It's because my dad has gotten into fitness because of this. It's because of these 3 friends got into fitness because of this. It's because of this message that somebody sent me the other day saying, wow, I went on a run because I saw this. It's about that stuff that's the powerful things that keep me going and keep me wanting to push further and further. And that for me is the opposite for meditation. It's actually intensely real experience. It really brings you back to reality and makes you question, why am I doing this?
Mm-hmm. That just made me think on a far smaller scale. Whenever I hurt myself physically, I like walk into a chair or whatever, just something that hurts you, either cuts you or whatever. The first thing I think about is what the animals are going through, and like the pain that they suffer. The castrations and the mutilations, the branding, dehorning, debeaking, and then finally that stab or the gas that burns your lungs, or the bolt gun that goes through your brain, and I try and just even try and imagine a little bit of what they're feeling, and my pain straight away goes away, and think, what am I feeling compared to them? Nothing, right? And it's just a small reminder for all of us, and I think it's something that I think all of us should be putting into practice when we either accidentally hurt ourselves. Let's think about others and like what they are going through, and let's do something to help them, because now you have that, even that 1 minute of excruciating pain that you're going through, use that pain to try and put yourself in the shoes of these beings that we unnecessarily hurt and torture and kill for nothing, for foods that we don't even need. And I think that's a very strong reminder. And again, if I'm training or running, I try and it's just something that I do. I try and like put myself in their shoes and in their bodies and think, okay, I'm feeling a little bit of discomfort compared to that pain and the unimaginable suffering that you're going through. Mine is nothing compared to that.
Yeah, that's really interesting because I have had exactly the same thoughts so many times about so many different things. And I've never mentioned that thought to anybody, but it's interesting that two vegans would have exactly the same motivate. It's even not even feeling pain, but actually also like feeling boredom. If I'm just like sat around not really doing anything, I'm like, well, a big part of like factory farming, for example, is or zero grazing in dairy cows, whatever it may be, is these animals never get to do anything. Like they are literally in the same room for the majority of their lives. There's no kind of socialization. There's nothing to play with, nothing to look at, nothing to do, nothing to think about, nowhere to go. It's the most boring life you can imagine, interspersed with the most pain, the most disease, culminating in a horrendous slaughter. But even just basic boredom, in our case, is a privilege because of what the animals experience, thanks to human-induced animal agriculture. It boggles the mind what these sentient beings must be going through. So even boredom for me harkens back to, well, what are the animals feeling right now?
Just tell me a little bit about this myth of grass-fed, organic, free range, because that's every single person, almost every single person I talk to, they have this picture, understandably, in their heads, because we've all been brainwashed with it by these industries, that cows are out grazing in the fields, chickens are out running around, sheep, lamb, whatever, right? I know it's still no excuse to kill them, but what's the reality when someone tries to say to you, oh yeah, but they're all having a lovely life?
Yeah. So it's something like, it depends on the country, and I think in the UK it's something like 95% of animals are factory farmed. And yet 95% of the omnivores you talk to will say, oh, I don't buy factory farmed stuff. It's like, no, you do, because otherwise otherwise only 5% of animals would be factory farmed. There's a huge just propaganda campaign by animal agriculture industries, by big meat and big dairy and big eggs, telling us that everything we buy is free range. Even today, you buy a dozen eggs I mean, not you and I, but people buy a dozen eggs in the shops, and it will still say free range on there, despite the fact that no bird in the UK, no farmed bird, has been outside of a barn since the 8th of November. That is not free range. That is multiple generations for these birds, actually, that have been inside now because of bird flu, because of avian flu, which is a horrendous fact. But we are sold this lie so commonly that, oh, the welfare is super high and they're grass-fed, free-range, organic. In actual fact, there are almost no regulations as to what free range means. It depends on the species. So for chickens, there's some regulations, but it's still something like 9 birds per square meter is free range. Like, that's fine. Imagine a square meter on the floor in front of you right now. 9 chickens in that space. They've got, actually, the average chicken has more space in the oven when it's roasted for a Sunday dinner than it ever did when it was alive, free range included. Free range does not mean that they have access to the outside all the time. It actually means they are allowed to live for 56 days, which is 8 weeks. For half of that time, 4 weeks of their life, they need to have access to an outdoor area. Now, that can just be like a small fenced off muddy area or concrete area over in the corner of the barn. And actually, many chickens may not even go out there at all, because chickens have a natural pecking order. So that's where the phrase pecking order comes from. It's only the chickens at the top of the pecking order who probably get access to the outdoors. The rest of them are just in the far corner of the barn, not enjoying anything at all. But even if these animals were somehow super free range, organic, grass fed, whatever it might be, even in that case, obviously it's never okay to farm them and kill them. It's like, I actually give people this kind of thought experiment. Imagine two dogs, right? One dog, dog A, has a lovely life, lives with a beautiful family, kids, and it's fun. It gets walked every day. This dog has the best life imaginable. And dog B is, living a horrendous life, suffering from multiple diseases, lots of, lameness and infection and injury. And these two dogs go to the vet. Which one is the vet more likely to euthanize, and which one for that is that more justified, right? Well, it's the dog that actually suffers from all this lameness, infection, injury that will be ultimately euthanized, because carrying on to live this life, there is no welfare anywhere to be seen. And obviously this is a debatable topic, but the dog that is living a happy life is actually more wrong on most people's perception to kill that dog, because there's no reason to. Like, it's having a good life. It's living the ideal for a dog. And that's not me saying, hey, we should go and take all these injured, diseased animals in factory farms and just kill all of them because it's fine to eat them because they've had such a bad life. It's me saying, actually, when you look at the grass-fed organic stuff, why do we assume it's okay to just kill those animals because they've had a good life? When for dogs, when they have a good life, it's unthinkable that we might kill them unless they end up getting terminal cancer or something like this. And most people, when they realise their double standards when it comes to dogs with good lives versus cows with good lives, they're like, oh yeah, like, why do I think it's better to kill a cow with a good life but worse to kill a dog with a good life? In my view, we ought to be doing everything we can to give every sentient being that we can a good life, and let them die natural deaths, or at least when it's arguably better for them to be put down due to having an end-of-life terminal condition or similar, then we can talk about doing so. That, in my view, is the vegan position. But the whole grass-fed organic stuff is a cop-out. It's a marketing ploy. It's something that most people at some time in their lives had fallen for. And sadly, it's something that most omnivores still fall for, because they have no idea where their food actually comes from.
Mm-hmm. And the other important thing is the level of trust. So, we have chickens as well that we rescued from, well, not rescued, but we adopted after they were rescued from free range, from, factory farmed egg farms, factory farmed egg farms. But the level of trust they build with you. So our oldest one is about 10 years old now. And she trusts me completely, to the point where if I pick her up, if I do something for her, if I have to feed her, give her medication, she is completely trusting about what I'm going to do. And she surrenders. She's like, you know what, I'm in loving hands. I know this guy just as well as I know her. And we have that bond. We have the connection, right? So it's far, far worse to kill someone that you've looked after, because they trust you. A little chicken, a cow, a pig, they love you. They're attached to you. And next thing you know, they're being shipped off to the slaughterhouse. And they're not stupid. They know that, they've been taken away forcefully. And to try and even imagine the level of betrayal they must be feeling at that point is just unimaginable again. I just cannot, and so that, I feel, again, people say, oh, but they've been looked after. We have to just, try and imagine the betrayal, the level of betrayal that these animals are going through. But you know what? That made me think. Your training and your athleticism. How has a vegan lifestyle, a plant-based lifestyle, helped you? How has it, boosted your fitness, and how's it going with that? Because I know, because you mentioned that you were pretty sporty before, and now you're doing even more. Do you feel a difference in what you used to eat compared to what you're eating now, and how that's affected your fitness?
Yeah, for sure. So I think actually a big thing that isn't talked about very much is the effects of a plant-based diet on motivation, right? Because as a vegan, there are so many stereotypes where vegans are thought to be, they're soy boys and they don't have any energy and they can't get enough protein, and, vegans are meant to be weak and pale individuals. I think a big part of the effects of a plant-based diet on my fitness have actually been my motivation to be as fit as I am, because I want to prove these people wrong. Right? I want to show them, actually, no, you have no legs to stand on, because I can outrun you, I can outrow you, I can outlift you, I can outclimb you, I can be better at you than you at all of these different things. Why are you telling me that I'm not fit? Funny story. When I was doing this 70-kilometre ultramarathon from Brecon to Cardiff a few months ago, I was, because it's kind of like a slow thing, like you can check your phone and check social media and stuff, because you're going at quite a slow pace, you're not really racing per se. So I got my phone out and I was checking my notifications, and I'd seen that my dad had shared, because my dad was there crewing me, so he was coming alongside. And I changed my socks when I was like 40, 45 kilometers in. So I took my socks off, put a new pair of socks on. My dad saw that a few of my toenails had gone black, which happens when you're running, because if you're wearing shoes that are slightly too wide, mostly, your toes will just hit the end of your end of your shoe repeatedly. So some of your toenails will inevitably kind of bruise and die off. And anyway, my dad mentioned that on his Facebook feed, because he posts lots of stuff on Facebook. And he put a picture of me, looking good and eating lots of crisps at this 45k point. And in the comments were people who hadn't exercised in decades, who were deeply unfit individuals, who were, ate meat 2-3 times a day, whatever, telling me that it was because of nutrient deficiencies that my toenails were coming off. So they were implying that I was somehow unfit and unhealthy when I just run 45 kilometers and still had like more than a half marathon to go. And these are people that couldn't run more than a kilometer in a straight line without keeling over and having a heart attack. And I was like, how can you sit there and tell me that I'm unhealthy because I've got a vegan diet, when I've, like, what else do you want me to do? And I think that is a thing that really motivates me, because I know that I'm fitter than the vast majority of the population. I know I'm going to keep going. I know I'm going to keep getting better. And I know that I'm going to be for at least some people, I'm going to show them that you can be fit and healthy on a plant-based diet. And that is a huge motivator for me. And I think that's a lot of the reason I'm as fit as I am. In terms of my actual physical fitness, the effects of a plant-based diet there, I'd say largely it's recovery speed. I think funny enough, I've not actually felt much different, except for I've got a lot more energy. I'm far more active. I mean, a lot of that does come down to doing more exercise, because when you do more exercise, you do have more energy to do things. But since being meat-based versus plant-based, I've actually recovered from sports way, way, way better than I ever used to. So cutting out dairy, for example, in my first kind of term or two at university, when I went fully vegan in that January, that meant that I was then recovering from my rowing training sessions like 2-3 times as quick as I used to. I used to have so much kind of lactic acid and pain and just DOMS, delayed onset muscle soreness, in my quads, in my legs, kind of in my shoulders and arms and stuff after weight sessions. And since going plant-based, especially since adopting more whole foods plant-based, having loads of antioxidants in things like berries and fruit and veg and just like whole grains, and also things like spirulina or flax seeds or chia seeds. Since going whole foods, my recovery has just been better than ever, basically. I can train multiple days in a row at high intensity, multiple sessions a day. I think I run something like 15, 16 times a week on average, which is quite a lot of that is my running commutes. But I'll run commute, I'll run to the gym, I'll do a gym session, I'll run back from the gym, I'll run to a climbing gym, I'll do climbing, I'll run back from there, I'll go on a cycle. I train loads. And when I was at university, I was training for rowing 9 or 10 times per week, both land sessions and water sessions. I was then weightlifting often about 2-3 times a week. And I was climbing between 1 and 3 times a week. And I was running 3 or 4 times a week, because I started training for my first marathon in my final year at university. So actually, my third year at uni particularly, I was training well in advance of like twice a day quite often. And I actually would go for a month, 2-3 months without a rest day, which is not optimal for most people. But I didn't feel like I needed a rest day, like ever, because I was eating well, and I was eating a lot as well, and still do. But I was also training a lot. But my rowing buddies, they train like 9 or 10 times a week for rowing, which is a lot to train, to be fair. But they would constantly be having like hip pain and joint pain and just DOMs and not feeling too good. And I'd finish an outing with them. And then I'd go and run 10 miles because I was like, well, I've got to get my marathon training in as well. And then in the evening, I'd go to the gym or go climbing with my friends. And I could train so much. And I was the only vegan in the boat. And I was recovering from this stuff just like that and still do. And I would credit that. Having looked at both my own personal anecdotal case, looked at other people's anecdotal cases, but also looked at what the science and nutrition actually suggests, I would say that recovery is the major thing for a plant-based diet.
Brilliant. So say someone comes up to you and say, look, do you know what? I want to go vegan. I want to go plant-based. Where can I start? Nutritionally, what should I look out for? Just if you could summarize that for us.
Yes. So there is not one optimum way, right? I think there's actually two optimal ways. So the first is purely pragmatically. If you want to go vegan, then substitute, right? If you used to have hot dogs, still have hot dogs, but make them plant-based hot dogs instead. Buy plant-based sausages. If you used to have bolognese, then just buy vegan mince instead. If you used to have, burgers, then buy vegan burgers. Have exactly the same diet that you would have had, but just buy plant-based products. Now, that is not optimal from a health perspective. Actually, funnily enough, there are studies that suggest, so there's one study on like Beyond Meat burgers versus beef burgers, and that said that actually Beyond Meat burgers are healthier than beef burgers. And typically, if you look at vegan sausages, they will be healthier in terms of their macro and micronutrients than pork sausages are. These things, generally speaking, hold true, but they're still not fantastic because the processed vegan products obviously are processed. And that means they're typically very high in salt. They're very high in things like emulsifiers and additives and sweeteners and things like preservatives and stuff they add in a factory with those names that you can't really pronounce. And I'm not one of those kind of, chemicals conspiracy theorists who somehow infer that every chemical is bad and forget that water is a chemical too. But I do think if you can't pronounce the name of something and it's like got letters and numbers jumbled around and all this kind of stuff, it's probably not the best thing you could be putting in your body. That's like a reasonable rule of thumb. Obviously, that doesn't hold when you're talking about things like, paracetamol. If you try and pronounce the actual scientific name of paracetamol, it's just some super long chemical name that nobody understands at all. But it's a good painkiller. But when it comes to things like processed meat replacements, you probably don't want to have too many of those, maybe 2 or 3 times a week at most, optimally. So the other optimum is actually the whole foods plant-based way. And this is what I'd recommend to people in kind of the long term, if they can move towards whole foods plant-based. One, way healthier than processed meat replacements and way, way, way healthier than a standard omnivorous diet. People on a whole foods plant-based diet have better outcomes when it comes to like cancer, like 15% less cancer overall. 15. That is a huge amount less cancer. It's 1 in 6 people who would get cancer now just don't get cancer because of a whole foods plant-based diet. Diabetes, something like 50% or 45% less diabetes type 2, which is also massive. Huge reductions in things like heart disease, huge reductions in weight management issues, huge reductions in kidney problems and liver problems. And basically everything we can have a problem with pretty much goes away, but reduces massively on whole foods plant-based diet. But it's more difficult for most people, at least, who are used to burgers and used to hot dogs and used to things like lasagnas and bologneses with like minced meat and used to all of these kind of shapes and formats of animal products we are brought up with. It's difficult to learn how to cook all these like stews and curries and use spices in different ways and use you don't have the like meat and potatoes type meal format anymore where meat is like the centerpiece and you just have vegetables around it. You have to learn different ways of enjoying food, essentially. And you have to learn different cuisines, lots of like Indian and African cuisine particularly, and Brazilian. are really amenable to the whole foods plant-based way of living, it is just more difficult. But it is also cheaper. You save so much money just buying beans and chickpeas and lentils than you do buying processed meat replacements. So the long story short is there is no one optimal way. It depends on, if you want to transition to a vegan lifestyle, the easiest way is substitutes all the way. But if you want to transition to healthy vegan lifestyle, move from the substitute method through to the whole foods method any day of the week.
Yeah. And I mean, look, even if it's challenging to start with, after a while, a week or two, because you've learned the method, it's easy. It's just like anything else. It's learning how to walk. Once you know how to do it, you don't even think about it. So, yeah, I 100% agree with all of that. I personally need to do the more whole foods thing because it's so easy. You go out, there's so much available right now that you just don't know what to pick half the times. And, when you do, you're sometimes tempted by all these plant-based um, foods out there. And for just like you said, I feel a lot of them are far healthier than any meat or dairy-based product out there. Not just in terms of to our health, but also to the environment, to the animals. The benefits just far outweigh and the norm. Do you know what, Rory? It's been fascinating. It's been inspiring. It's been so educational. I wish we could just carry on and on with this because I feel there's another podcast with you coming. But I want to end this on a high. I want to ask you if you could have one wish for the world, what would it be? And what impact would you as a person like to have on this world before you go?
Interesting. I wish we could take to heart the idea of shrinking towards abundance. And what that means is each of us kind of become smaller in terms of our consumption, in terms of our impact on the world, but each of us finds more, what's the word? More completion, more kind of contentness with the idea of having less. I wish we could get away from this idea that you have to have more to be more. Actually, no, you need to be more to be more. And by being more, you actually have less. We don't need to eat animal products. We don't need to, jet set across the world and have private jets. We don't need to buy this new phone or this new technology or new clothes. We don't need to grow physically or financially or in terms of possessions materially. Shrinking towards abundance, I think, is the most powerful thing we can do. And that has implications not just in veganism, but in basically every aspect of our lives. I think that's the most impactful thing we could possibly have, is to really embody and live through the idea of shrinking towards abundance.
Love that. Thank you, man. And what impact, sorry, would you like to have on the world as an
Impact I'd like to
individual?
have.
Yeah.
I guess it's that. I mean, my mission at the moment is a vegan one. And I think out of the vegan mission of minimizing suffering also comes my environmental mission, which is ultimately the environment only matters because sentient beings live in it, right? So this kind of vegan environmentalist ethical framework that I'm trying to instill in the world, that is the impact I want to have. Again, coming back to the beginning of the pod, that's my why. And I think it all comes back to, again, this shrinking towards abundance. If I can have the impact of just influencing one person to go vegan. In fact, I already know that I've influenced multiple people to go vegan, which is the highlight of my life. And the thing that I'll always be the most proud of is the people that I've helped to go vegan in even some small way. But I think if my impact can just be to help these people kind of imbibe this worldview that is ultimately better just across the board, that will be the thing that means I can one day die happily, knowing I've helped just a few people go vegan.
Beautiful. Thank you. So just to end this, if you could recommend for a newbie or for someone who just wants to get as much information as they can, if you could recommend one book, one film, and one website, what would you recommend? And finally, to end it, how can people get in touch with you if they wanted to get in touch with you?
Sure. Book. Ooh. It's actually a tough one. So I started reading Earthling Ed's This is Vegan Propaganda. And I realized that it was essentially everything I say to people on the regular anyway. So I didn't actually finish it because I felt like I was the book already almost. And I was just reading a reflection of myself and my own rhetoric. But it is a very good book from the half that I did read. Alternatively, actually, this is a niche one, but Jason Hribal, so surname is Hribal. He's a scholar of kind of the history of animal rights and the animal rights movement. He wrote a book which is called, I've forgotten the name of it now. It's essentially to do with animals in captivity turning against the humans that keep them there. It's an amazing book. It's a very short book. It's called Fear of the Animal Planet. I've just Googled. So Fear of the Animal Planet is a fascinating read. As I say, it's very short, it's very niche, but it covers all these animals and its cases back to the 19th century where they turn against humanity. And websites, I would say probably Michael Greger's websites.
Nutritionfacts.org.
Nutritionfacts.org, that's the one.
Yeah.
He's also actually given a brilliant speech called How Not to Die, and he's also written a book called How Not to Die. And that is essentially on the benefits of whole food plant-based diet.
Amazing. I have to say, this has been one of the most inspiring podcasts I've done, and can't thank you enough, man.
I'm pleased. I'm so pleased.
I know we haven't met personally.
We will do soon.
But I look forward to that day, and
likewise.
And yeah, thank you for everything.
Thank you, man. Cheers. Thank you for having me.
All right, we'll be in touch.
Cheers.